Hi, I'm Ziqi with Academic Harmony, and the topic of today's video is warm-ups. So as you know, regardless of what instrument you play, warming up is definitely a crucial part of your practice routine. So in today's video, I'm going to share some of my personal experiences, how I approach my own practice routine in terms of warming up, and just to give you some tips and recommendations for forming your own warm-up routine. So a note before we get started, if you're a violinist or a string player, that's great because this video is geared more towards violin techniques and general string techniques. But if you're not, that's okay because I'm going to also give some general ideas for how you can approach warm-up. So let's get started. So before we even pick up our instruments and start playing, it's really important to do some stretching and jumping jacks because that's going to help us get our blood flow going, and it's going to help us relieve some of the tensions in our muscles and in our body. And that's going to help us stay relaxed throughout the entire practice session. So after doing that, the first thing I do is always to warm up my right hand. So the way I do that is I hold my bow horizontally and I just rotate it very slowly, like this. So back and forth. And while doing that, I just slowly release my fingers so that when the bow is this way, I have only my pinky supporting the weight of the whole bow. And when the bow is this way, I have my index finger supporting the entire weight. So this might be a little bit awkward or kind of difficult at first to hold the entire bow with one finger, but as you get used to it, it's going to feel more comfortable, and you can repeat this for maybe 1 or 2 minutes. And this is going to help you increase the strength in your fingers, and it's going to help you when you encounter some difficult bow techniques or bow strokes in your repertoire. The next thing I do is playing some open strings. The reason I do that is to make sure that my bow is going in a straight line. That's very important because it's going to help you with your tone and projection. So when you do this, make sure to stand in front of a mirror so you can see your bow, and make sure that when you're playing the open strings, make sure to use full bows, so all the way from the front to the tip, and make sure that it's perpendicular to the bridge, the string, and make sure that it's going in a perfectly straight line. And I'll demonstrate that. So. So as I said, having a straight bow would really help with your tone. Sometimes it helps you with projection. So it's very important that you do this. So at first, you might be uncomfortable with doing this, so it might take you longer. But as time goes on, you kind of build up a muscle memory. So that when you're bowing, you don't even think about it, and that's what you're eventually trying to achieve. So after practicing some open strings, the next thing I do is always scales. In my opinion, practicing scales is the most important thing in a practice routine. So no matter how much time you have to practice, say for example, you're very busy and you only have 30 minutes to practice, always make sure to have scale as a part of your practice routine, because it kind of serves as the foundation of everything, and it helps you to improve your intonation, and it also helps to warm up your left finger. So here's an example of a C major 1 octave scale.
Thank you.
is the kind of scale that you want to start off with. So make sure to use really long bows, separate each note, make sure that they're all in tune, and just practice it very slowly. And when you get more comfortable with playing scales, you can move on to 2 octaves and 3 octaves, and you can increase the speed of your scales, like doing 2 notes per bow, 4 notes, 8 notes, or even slurring all the way up and down. And you do that when you're more comfortable with playing scales. So here's a 3 octave C major scale. So this is where you eventually want to get to. So the scale that I just played, it wasn't perfect. There were some intonation mistakes, but you really want to focus on having a really good intonation when you practice your scales, because that is going to translate to when you practice your repertoire. So practicing scales like this is very, very important. Also, when practicing scales, it's also crucial to keep in mind that you're not just practicing 1 or 2 scales. You want to practice all of the scales that are out there, scales of different keys. You want to practice both major and minor scales. So there are 12 distinct tones, chromatic tones in an octave, and each of them corresponds to a scale. And there are major scales and they have relative minor scales. So you want to practice all of them when you're practicing scales. So there are 2 ways that you can approach this. So the first one is you can just go up the chromatic scale. For example, you start with your C major scale, and then after that you would play the relative A minor scale, and then you would move on to C sharp major, which is the same as D flat major, and then you can play the relative minor of B flat minor scale, and then you can just go do this all the way up the chromatic scale until you finish the whole thing with C major scale again, so after 1 complete cycle. And the second option is to do the circle of fifths. So if you don't know what it is, it's basically a way to get around the entire chromatic circle without repeating any of the scales. So for example, if you start with a C major scale, you play through the C major scale, and then you play the A minor scale, which is the relative minor to C major. After that, you would go a 5th down from C, which is F. So you would play C major scale, and then F major scale, and then B flat major scale, which is a 5th down from F, and then you would play E flat major, and then A flat major, and then so on and so forth until you have completed the entire circle. This one is pretty similar to the going up the chromatic scale, but it's more convenient because all you need to do is when you're doing the relative minor, you just need to go down 1.5 steps from the major scale, and then when you move on to 1 minor scale to the next major scale, you just need to go down 2 whole steps. So let me actually show you what that is. So first I play a C major scale, right? So that's a C major scale, and then I go down 1.5 steps. So now I arrive at the minor, relative minor of the C major scale, right? So I just need to go down 1.5 step, and then I play the minor scale. Right? So after that, I go down 2 whole steps. So 2 whole steps down will be, right? So I end up on F. So now I play the F major scale. So after that, I go down from the major to minor, it's 1.5 step, right? So, and now I play my D minor scale. So I would keep doing this until I go around the entire chromatic circle, and eventually you'll end up on C major again, and that's when you know you've completed the entire chromatic table. And that's a way to get through all of the keys, all of the key signatures without repeating any of them, and that's a really important thing to do. So after practicing the scales, the next thing I do are arpeggios. If you don't know what an arpeggio is, it's basically a sequence of notes. So you start with the first note of the scale, and then you go to the third, and then the fifth, and then the octave. So that's what an arpeggio is. Similar to scales, when you practice arpeggios, you want to practice it in every key signature, and you can also choose to do 1 octave, 2 octaves, or 3 octaves, depending on your skill level. So here's in 1 octave A major scale. Right, and then here's a 2 octave major scale. I mean, arpeggio. And then here's a 3 octave arpeggio. Okay, so you can practice these arpeggios, major and minor, in every key signature, and it's similar to scales. It's also a building block, it's foundation for improving your intonation when you're practicing repertoire. When we talked about scales, we talked about single note scales all the way up and down. But when you get into more advanced music, more advanced repertoire, you're going to need other techniques as well. So for example, double stops, you have thirds, fifths, sixths, octaves, and sometimes even tenths. And you have a lot of other techniques such as artificial harmonics, sometimes double stops with artificial harmonics, and you have left-hand pizzicato, etc. So these are all of the things that you can also practice. And so here's my way of practicing it. So in my opinion, for double stops, thirds and octaves are the most important ones. So the way I practice thirds is I just play thirds in a particular scale and just go all the way up and down that scale. So I usually do a 2 octave thirds scale. So for example, here's a B flat major scale with thirds, right? So that was a thirds scale. So what I was doing, I was going from one note to another, and I switched those between playing the note. So what I focus on is the spacing between my fingers, because that can get really tricky. So because with thirds, you can have closed positions and open positions, and your fingers can be 2 whole steps apart or 1.5 steps apart. And your finger can have really weird combinations of positions. And just going through these scales with thirds can be really helpful. And then next, I practice octaves. So for octaves, I just pick 2 strings and then just play a 1 octave scale on it with octaves. So for example, I would play G and D string, and I would just play a 1 octave G major scale with octaves. So it would be something like this. And I would practice a lot of scales with this, and it's going to help you build into your muscle memory the spacing for octaves, because when you're in lower positions such as first and second position, the space between your first and fourth finger, the entire hand frame might be very big, but as you move up the fingerboard, it's going to get smaller and smaller, and it takes a lot of practice to build those muscle memories. So the last thing I want to talk to you about is how to practice vibratos. So in case you don't know, vibrato is basically vibrating the pitch, so that the pitch is oscillating up and down instead of just going straight. So you do that by vibrating your hand, by slightly changing the length of the string, just slightly. And there are 2 kinds of vibratos. So you have wrist and arm vibrato. So here's an example of wrist vibrato. So you have your wrist moving, or you can have arm vibrato, in which your entire arm is moving back and forth. So it would be like. Both of those techniques are very common, and I'm just going to show you how I practice vibrato. So the way I do it is I just play a very, very slow scale, and I just incorporate vibrato into every single note. It's really important to just focus on how fast and how slow you want your vibrato to be. You want to have control over the speed of your vibrato, and also just how wide it is. Right? You want to have control over it. That's the whole point of practicing it, right? So for example, if I play an A major scale with vibrato, I can experiment with how wide or how narrow I want the vibrato to be. Like, so I can have it really, really narrow, so, or I can have a very wide vibrato, so like, I can also control how fast or how slow my vibrato is. So like, or maybe slower, like this. So different kinds of music require different kinds of vibrato, and it's just really helpful to practice these vibratos on scales, and just varying the speed, varying how wide it is, and just going through scales and incorporating vibrato into them. And that's how I practice vibrato. So that's it for today's video on warm-ups. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video informative and helpful, and I hope you can take in some advice and recommendations from me and incorporate some of those elements into your own practice routine. Yeah, so good luck practicing, and please check out some of the other amazing videos made by our Academic Harmony members. Bye!